OWASP top 10. Lots of movement in 2025 on that list, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and I know we're just jumping into it, but you pinged me and said, "Hey, let's talk about OWASP," and I was like, "Yeah, all right, that sounds good." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Actually, I need to go look at the latest and greatest before I start talking about that. Make sure I'm not talking about my butt here." But
Yeah. Hey, it's new. It's brand new. It just came out, 2025. So it just came out a couple weeks ago. I think 2, 3 weeks ago.
nice.
Um, they came out with it. So just before the end of the year, um, which is cool. And yeah, it's interesting to, you know, talk about, look into, see what's changed. It's obviously been a couple years. So the last revision would have been 2021.
Yeah,
So it's definitely been a couple of years, and it's always interesting to see what changes and see what's, what's new and exciting. Um, and also was just interesting to see. So I had never really researched kind of what's behind it. I've, known about it obviously for years. I think most listeners probably know what OWASP top 10, like we've, at least heard the term. If you've done any kind of application security, you've definitely gone through
yeah,
the OWASP top 10. But most security practitioners have at least heard of it. But I know for myself, I had never really gone down the kind of rabbit hole of like, what does it really mean? Where do they really get the data from? Um, it's always just been a well respected source of, oh yeah, that's the OS. Those are the top 10 things in software development. Those are the top 10 security issues. But
yeah.
um, I never really gone down the like actually research what's behind it. So finally had a chance to do that, and yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, nice. Now it struck me the movement was interesting, but also just the framework itself. One of the things, kind of like you, I don't really look into, where it came from or, how they're making those decisions, whatnot. But what I do hear a lot of times is, oh, we're following OWASP top 10 in our security practice. And then what strikes me in the results or in this update is that there are a lot of, I don't want to call them basic because they're hard to do, but there's a lot of basic security principles that aren't really being practiced, which bumped up everything to, the top three changed, and the top three are areas where good security practice gives you the best protection. And so it was interesting to me just to kind of see that in those results, because that's data driven versus anecdotal stuff where, you talk to customers and say, how's your configuration management going? And, everything's, well, we're doing okay at our infrastructure as code. And we have a couple tools for these, this, that, or the other. But reality from the results, at least in the OWASP, whoever was surveyed there, I don't know where they get that from, is,
We're about to find
excuse
out.
me,
We're about to find out.
yeah, there's still a lot of places, um, there's still a lot of practice that needs to be enhanced there in the configuration side where, software supply chain, and misconfiguration, those 2, okay, this is Rocky's brain, but I kinda lumped those 2 together, right? Both of those are, to me, are configuration things, like, you need it if you're building configuration in a meaningful way, reviewing, looking for vulnerabilities, hardening baselines, all that kind of stuff, right? That solves a lot of your supply chain problems along the way. They are 2 different practices, so I don't want to belittle the folks that work in those areas, right? Um, but I bucket all that together in my mind with, if you're thinking about the supply chain, you're thinking about the configuration. If you're thinking about the configuration, you're thinking about the supply chain, right? And by hardening one or the other of those things, that you can probably solve a lot in those next 2 categories. But then the
Yep.
one that's continues to be the bane of everybody's existence is identity, which was interesting. So, but yeah, it's very interesting to look into and just kind of think a little bit more about what's happening there. And then in these conversations where that this is one of those things that's always struck me when I'm talking to folks is, well, we follow OWASP. I'm like, well, OWASP is just a very, very specific view of security. It's not, it's not a holistic framework. It's not meant to be a holistic framework. It's meant to just kind of show you what's going on kind of on the app dev side and, the application stack. So it's going to expose a lot, but it's not a holistic framework where, some others, CIS or NIST and some of these others are going to be a lot bigger, cover a lot more ground, a lot more practice, policy, et cetera. So anyway,
Yeah.
some
Yep.
quick fire dump of just all these things that I'm thinking about as I'm
All the
looking,
thoughts.
looking at the updates. So
Yeah. Yep. No, it's gonna be good. So yeah, let's get into it. So if you are listening and you've never heard of OWASP, you don't know what we're talking about. This is totally foreign.
Not
Um,
bees, not killers of bees.
yeah, not that kind of wasp. Yep. So
Okay.
it's an acronym, as everything else in security tends to be.
No.
So it stands for the Open Worldwide Application Security Project. So it is a community of folks that are dedicated to application security, to making the world better, to making software more secure. And it's open, so anybody can contribute to it. You can use it for free. There's no, restrictions on it. It's a really good source of information. And then well, not every year, but every couple of years, they will update their top 10 list, which is what we're going to talk about today. So they come out with this list, and like I said, it is 10 things that are problems in the security of applications in the world. So let's talk about the data first, because that's kind of important, right? So
Yeah.
um, what they're actually looking at is they get sample information from a whole bunch of different places. So this year they had, and let me get this number right, 2.8 million applications that were submitted for their data set to review for the top 10 um, issues in 2025. So 2.8 million applications. That's a lot. That's a lot of applications. And basically, what they do is they look at those applications and they see if those applications have one or more of the CWEs. Don't worry, these
Yep.
are terms we're going to get into.
Common
Um,
weakness
if
enumeration.
Yes, common weakness enumeration. So if those applications that were submitted had one or more of those weaknesses identified in them, and so that's what goes into the data of the top 10. So it doesn't really matter how many weaknesses an application might have.
Yeah.
Some of those submitted applications may have, multiple in every single category of the top 10. It doesn't really matter. It's one or more. So that's all they're
Yeah.
really looking at is, does it have one or more of these weaknesses? So the top 10 is made up of a whole bunch of weaknesses. If you are not familiar with CWEs, you've never heard of them, common weakness enumeration is something that comes from MITRE. So MITRE has this whole database of these weaknesses, and there's, I think, about 900 right now, 930 or something like that.
Yeah.
As of this recording, I'm sure it's going to continue to grow. But lots and lots and lots of weaknesses in different applications, operating systems, software platforms, right? Maybe it's Python, a specific issue, whatever. There's categorization that they do. So you can get really specific. You can really deep dive into a lot of weaknesses. The term weaknesses is obviously important because they're not necessarily vulnerabilities yet, because it's just a weakness. It's a potential issue, right? It could exist in the application, but it may never show up as a vulnerability.
Yeah.
So, may or may not become a problem later, but it is, generally speaking, a bad idea, or a potential problem,
Well,
right?
and it's not just the weakness, like they're actually CVSS scores, right? So they're taking the common vulnerability scoring and like applying that. So if it's not just, hey, you have this weakness, but then also this scored poorly in the data set. So it's kind of that combination of you have this weakness, but also it is exposed, right? And
Yes.
is failing this, you know. Well, that's what makes it fail is that combination of lots of bad CVSS score, and then also it's a common weakness.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So OWASP takes all that data, and so the weaknesses, the scores from CVSS V2 and V3. They are not using V4 yet, but they take V2 and V3, and all of that goes together.
Yeah.
There's a formula that they explain on their site if you really want to know what it is and really go,
You want to do
deep
some
into it.
reading, or you can't sleep.
Yeah, yeah. If you can't sleep, you need some good reading. Go check out the formula. It's super interesting stuff. Let me tell
Yeah.
you. Um, but yeah, so they put all that together, and that's actually what the top 10 is. So when you look at, like, number one, broken access control, there are 40 weaknesses as a part of that category.
Yeah.
So, or that number one thing. Um, and yes, a whole bunch of vulnerability data and everything else underneath it. So that's important to understand when we look at the top 10. It's really easy to just kind of look at the top 10 and go, yeah, there's 10 things that I need to be worried about. Not really. There's a whole lot more.
Yeah,
They are capped at
not just
40.
10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not just 10. There's 40 weaknesses that they do impose a cap on that. And there's a whole bunch of discussion among the experts that lead the OWASP organization that decide, how do we how do we get this to 40? Because like I
Yeah.
said, there's a whole database of over 900. And they try to limit it so that there's not, so much going on inside of each category of the top 10. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, so that's super important to understand. The other thing that is important to understand that I also didn't know is that there are two of the top 10 that are reserved for the community essentially to
Uh,
vote on. Um, so they have actually 8 that come from the data. So there are top 8 from the data side. So all those statistics we just talked about, right? Those 2.8 million applications that were submitted, how many issues did they have or weaknesses? Um, that informs only 8 of the top 10. And then there are 2 that are reserved for the community to vote on. So that means that, sometimes things don't show up in the data. So, an issue that's going on or something that's new or, pen testers maybe are seeing in the wild, it might take a long time to show up in the data that's coming from automated scans and, wherever else the data about these applications is coming from.
yeah.
So I thought it was really cool that they reserve 2 for the community, and those 2 things can be put in without really data necessarily behind them. It's more of like a gut feel
Yeah.
from the community. So from the all the people that are contributing to this. So that was pretty interesting as well, because that can certainly change things. Like I think this year, it's the software supply chain, which was not necessarily in the top 10 when they looked at the data, but when they asked the community, like, hey, what do you think are the top, problems in the software world? That one got, a ton of votes essentially. So
One spoiler alert, I think that's again, in my mind, I put those 2 things together, right? Misconfiguration and software supply chain, as I said earlier. Well, look at the OWASP top 10 for 2025. It's misconfiguration and then software supply chain. So it scored enough from the community that it's right there behind misconfiguration when you could potentially lump that in. And maybe I'll go make some contributions to OWASP next year and try to advocate for my position that that's part of good configuration practice. But yeah, so that's it. That's super interesting, John, because I didn't realize that one came from the community. And so that's very interesting to see because it is an area where we know there are issues, and then it's proven. So it's interesting. Like the community is saying software supply chain is a problem, and then the data says misconfiguration is a problem, right? So like the two views, while they're not necessarily looking at it the same way, came up with the same result. This is a big area of security concern.
yeah, yep, yeah, it is. It is. It was very very interesting and eye opening to, like I said, dig into kind of how these things come about.
Yeah, super interesting. Just the movement has been interesting. The scoring is interesting. So, um, John, talk a little bit about what that movement looked like. I know just by quickly digging through some of that movement, I was surprised. Well, surprised is the wrong word because again, these are the things that we hear as we do security assessments through the years. Like these are where the weaknesses are. This is what we feel like. One of the things that strikes me as I talk to customers is the top 3 areas are also the top 3 where I get the most pushback, when I'm talking about investing in remediations. Um, Sometimes the pushback is budget. Sometimes the pushback is, well, we think we're doing fine here. Sometimes the pushback is, I think maybe, and this is the most common, I think, is it's just daunting. Like
Yeah,
addressing these top 3 is daunting, you know? And so I think a lot of times it's like, well, we're doing stuff, we have some practice, we don't we feel like we're doing what we can do, and so we're not even going to talk about it. It's like the ostrich approach, right? Like we're just going to bury our heads in the sand because we know we're doing something, and we don't want to. We don't have the budget to do more, and so why even look at it? Almost is kind of the feeling that I get a lot of times when talking about these top three things. And again, OWASP. I mean, it's not like these top three things aren't that surprising, right? And so, John, talk about the top three and the movement from 21 to 25, and then let's talk a little bit more about what we're seeing here across our customer base, but also just in conversations um, on where these investments need to go, maybe to help close some of these gaps.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it is super interesting to see, and as we talked about earlier too, right? It's not always as simple as three things. There's a whole bunch of weaknesses underneath each of these,
Yeah,
um but yeah, so let's break it down. All right. So if you go to the OWASP.org website, and we'll link this in the show notes as well for you if you need it. But they have this beautiful little diagram that kind of shows, how things have moved between 2021 and 2025. So right off the bat, you can see broken access control still holding strong at number one. And again, there's a whole bunch of things included in that, but it is interesting there to see that access control is still the kind of the biggest problem. Um, Underneath that, we can see cryptographic failures, injection, and insecure design have all dropped down places, which is interesting.
that
And
is
as
interesting.
Rocky noted, security misconfiguration and vulnerable and outdated components, which has a new name now called software supply chain failures, have moved up. So those are your two and three now: misconfiguration and supply chain.
I got into an interesting conversation on LinkedIn with somebody. They posted like, vulnerability management dead or something along those lines, and, uh, software supply chain, who cares, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I would say who cares. So anyway, we went back and forth. I'd have to go look up the conversation and remember what it was all about. Um, again, that kind of what I was saying earlier. It feels like people are throwing up their hands a little bit and like, we can't keep up. So we're just going to move on.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That is always interesting. I mean, there's so many things to keep up with. Obviously, technology moves super fast. So,
Yeah.
um, it's if for me and I, obviously for you as well. Like it's super fun to talk about the new and exciting stuff. We've got obviously AI is the big thing nowadays. Everybody's talking about,
Yeah.
and it's super fun to talk about. And even this was the case with DevOps when that was kind of the big thing, and it was all starting and it was super fun to talk about, and it was all the rage. Everybody trying to get on board and do that. Even moving to cloud, right? There's all these things that kind of continue to come out. But what's I think important to remember is that there's still a whole bunch of organizations that
Yeah.
are not there yet, right? So um,
Yeah.
you hear people say things like, "Yeah, vulnerability management is dead." Well, that may be true for an organization that is, you know, cloud native and has adopted more modern things, or they don't have servers that they manage and they don't need to patch and deal with that stuff. But don't forget that there's still a whole bunch of other organizations that do have to deal with that and are still living in that nightmare of managing servers. So yeah, I don't know, just another interesting tidbit there.
Yeah. No, there's still a ton of that. I've been living in the cloud native world for the last couple of years from a client perspective. And then obviously in our day jobs with the acquisition, there's a lot more, there's a broader customer base. So there's a lot more traditional organization as well. And so you start to see some of these themes are still there, still hanging around. And the cloud native side, they're also there. So it's not like the cloud native guys are getting this better, but some of them are doing this better, I would say, because of the nature of the beast and the way that they're operating and managing. But it's still, and clearly, I'm going to guess that most of the customers surveyed here to come up with the OS top 10 are cloud based, right? They're cloud native in some degree, and so it'd be interesting to see. It would be interesting to see that data. I haven't looked that far into this data set, so I couldn't tell you how it breaks down, John. I don't know if you know, but
Yep. Yep. Let's see. I just had that up a second ago.
Oh, of course he
It's
does. This is why I love my brother, you guys.
it's a lot. There were organizations like Accenture, Veracode, SemGrep, Sonar, Orca. There were multiple anonymous. So,
Okay.
who knows who that is? That could
Yeah,
be
makes
organizations
sense.
that are submitting data and then don't want their name on this page.
Yeah,
Um, so number of vendors, obviously Veracode, right? Big in that space. So they're going to get both on-prem, older applications as well as cloud native applications, I'm sure. Um, so I think it's a good mix as far as the data goes.
yeah. Well, that's good. That is interesting to see. I mean, again, the practice the practice doesn't change whether you're cloud native or not, right?
Yeah.
Which is an area, which is an area where even in the DevOps days, like you were saying, a lot of your cloud natives were adopting that, jumping all in. It was, traditional org or orgs that were still had a lot of on-prem or what we call now legacy infrastructure, who felt like, no, I don't need to do this. And I spent a lot of time back in that day of helping them see how that would benefit them, even though they weren't trying to go cloud native, and how moving towards code-based infrastructure really does help and is applicable even if you're not trying to be cloud native, right? Defining configurations as code, enforcing those gives you the ability to harden and audit and, all that kind of stuff. And so it's kind of the same thing here where cloud native or not, and so that's interesting that data actually proves out that whether you're cloud data or cloud man, I am struggling
Cloud
today.
native.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether you're cloud native or not, the data says these are still issues, right? And so that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's pretty broad. So, all right. So then we'll go back to the list. So 7, 8, 9 pretty much stayed the same. So identification and authentication failures. Um, that one I think is kind of interesting because they noted in the data set here and in the the kind of summary of that category that one is down at number 7 because that one actually has gotten better over the last few years because of the
Oh, good.
use of third party like different libraries and things.
Yeah.
Essentially, people finally kind of catching on that like you shouldn't roll your own authentication.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's hard to get right and you should use something or offload it to your cloud provider like
Yeah.
AWS, Google, Azure, right? They all have built-in identification and authentication mechanisms that you can just use. You don't have to write your own. So
Yeah.
um that was interesting to me. That was because I first looked at it like, oh, identification, like that's a huge thing, but it's down at number 7 because it is actually getting better. So
Yeah.
that's encouraging. Yeah, so software and data integrity failures still at number 8. Security logging and monitoring still down at number 9. I think that one is also interesting because from a software perspective, I get why it's at number 9. If I look at this from an infrastructure lens in a, like a security assessment lens, that is usually up at the top. But this is
Yeah.
not an infrastructure thing. This is all about applications. So I get why that one's kind of down at number 9.
Yeah, and that's
Uh,
an important call out though, is this is the view of kind of the software slash app dev view of the world.
yeah,
And so super useful stuff, useful data. Um, I would argue that whether you're doing a lot of software dev or not, these are still important things to be thinking about, because even your, off the shelf stuff is going to be affected by all this. Um, and so it's just really kind of thinking through, okay, the framework itself is designed to really score based on how often the vulnerabilities happen, how easy they are to exploit, and then how much damage they cause, in the real world. And so as you're looking at this list or thinking maybe we don't do software development, well, okay, but you are using software even if you're not building it, and you're building infrastructure for that software to run on. So again, even if you're not developing the application stack, these things all still do apply, but it is that purview. So kind of thinking, balancing that with what you're maybe is top of, to your point, John, as a security guy, as a security operator, as a security analyst, you might say, hey, actually that needs to move way up the list because from my perspective, I could catch a lot of this if I had better monitoring and alerting, right? So there's a
Yeah.
balance there to be struck.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And there's overlap between the two, right? Like they kind of can't be separated. You got to run your application somewhere.
Yeah.
So, you're talking about misconfiguration. Yes, there are misconfigurations and can be misconfigurations in the application, but there can also be misconfigurations in the infrastructure. And although different, they are very much related to one another and go hand in hand. You can't really
Yeah.
separate them. So, but yeah, it's an important distinction because here we're talking about just the applications. So, um, but yeah, and then number 10, SSRF, so server-side request forgery, has been moved into broken access control, which is an interesting move. But I get that one as well. It kind of makes sense to move that up. And then so that we have a new number 10, which is mishandling of exceptional conditions. So that rounds out our new 2025 OWASP top 10. And yeah, like I said, if you haven't looked at it, definitely take a look. If you are developing software, absolutely you need to know all 10 of these and understand what they are. OWASP also has a huge repository and page full of resources for anybody that's developing anything. If you want to know more information about any of these, there's prevention cheat sheets. So, super quick and dirty breakdown of what is the problem and how do I fix it so I can move on with my life. That's out there. So definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it's also interesting that uh, SSRF is part of the survey. So, kind of what you were talking about earlier, like that was a survey result. It does fit in this broken access control, so they just rolled it all up. And so it does make you wonder what will happen, next 3, 4 years when the next survey comes out. Some of these that are, like software supply chain, that is a survey result. But again, in my mind, that's configuration. You handle that through configuration and infrastructure as code and those types of things, right? So does that get rolled up and something else make the list? So it'll be interesting to see over the next few years. But regardless, um, there's some stuff to work on here. And I think building those practices, those foundational practices, thinking about how we handle, I mean, okay, if I look down this list and think broken access control, security misconfiguration, software supply chain failures, right? Top three. Right? How do I lay a foundation that addresses those before they become a problem? And to me, you do that by better design. So it's actually interesting that as I was looking at this list, it's interesting to me that secure design is further down the list because, well, if that's number 6 now, um, that to me, that almost needs to be number 1 only because, okay, this is just, maybe I'll give survey results. uh,
Yeah.
but that's where this all starts. It starts right there. It starts in the design, right? So you don't end up with broken access control if you design your access and think about the access to those systems and how that's going to flow, um, before you deploy it, right?
Yep.
Misconfiguration. If we create a secure design and we think about the dependencies of software supply chain, we think about the dependencies of our application stacks, where those are going to come from, how we're going to handle pulling in open source projects and all these things, right? That can introduce vulnerabilities that maybe we knew about or didn't know about or whatever, right? Things like scanning. So part of your design has to include security scanning so that, is there a known vulnerability in this package that I'm adding to my software project now? So again, that to me, design becomes the thing that helps you solve this. And I'm really excited by some of the things that are happening in the industry. You mentioned AI everywhere. There's some cool things happening there that can help us do this better and faster, and maybe change this list in the next 3, 4 years, right? Where we're a lot more hard than we have been in the past because we can use some of these tools. So it's actually going to be super interesting to see because I think a lot of it's going to change in the next few years. But there's also, anecdotally, I think a lot of this is moving up the list because we are using some of these tools over the last 3, 4 years, right?
Yep.
And so we're building more and we're building faster and we're getting sloppier. Right? We're getting sloppier and sloppier with what we deployed. So we should be better. Our design should be better, but instead they're coming out the other side messier, more vulnerable because we're moving faster than ever before. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that one will be interesting to keep an eye on for sure. But again, another important call out is that these are weaknesses. So things
Yeah.
moving down the list here, all right, is actually a good thing.
Yep.
So insecure design dropping 2 spots. It actually dropped down to number 6 because the trend is that there are more folks that are considering the design, considering security in the design phase. So in
Yeah.
this case, dropping down the list is actually a good thing. That means the weaknesses are slowly but surely disappearing from those categories. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, certainly still it's this is not necessarily a list of importance of like, this
Yeah.
design is the most important thing, because obviously, yeah, that is a super important thing. It's a great place to start, and is absolutely where we want to start with security is in the design phase
Yeah.
as early as possible. But yeah, this list specifically is just the weaknesses. So when something is dropping down this list, it's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird, especially for my brain as well, that I had to really think about, like, wait, it's moving
Yeah.
down. That's bad, but
Yeah.
it's actually good.
No,
That
it
means
is it is good. The only reason I'm saying let's keep it at the top is because you keep it up there and people don't forget. And that's one of those
yeah,
interesting things. It's like it moves down the list. And so what do we all do? Oh, good, we're getting better at that. And so we move on, right? And then you
yeah,
come back 3 years from now and oops, it moved from 6 now back to 5, right? We don't want that to happen. And so I think that's why that call out of like if if 1, 2, and 3 are all configuration related, then please don't lose sight of the fact that you need to have good secure design practice um, to help continue that trend. Because yeah, maybe in 5 years from now, 4 years from now, whenever the next version comes out, um, this whole thing changes because we're doing that way better, right? Um, and so maybe by the time the next report comes out, the thing that's at the top of the list is the monitoring and failures because like, hey, we solved all this and now we're designing super well, and the only thing we need to work on is logging better. Wouldn't that be great?
right,
Yeah,
right. Yep. Yeah, it is interesting. The other thing that I find interesting here too is things like, the impact is not necessarily proportional to its
mm,
place on the list, right?
yeah,
So just because something like broken access control is at number one, meaning there were the most weaknesses, or weaknesses with the biggest impact. The thing that is most risky isn't always the thing that gets you.
yeah,
So I find that interesting when I look at cryptographic failures, because that one to me can be incredibly impactful. Not to say
sure,
that broken access control couldn't be, but cryptographic failures can be really, really bad. Just
yeah,
looking at some of the weaknesses in that category and kind of looking through that sort of struck me of uh, cryptographic. It's good that it's going down,
yeah.
because that could be a really bad one. So another one to, yeah, not lose track of.
Yeah, one of the things that as I look at this list and think about, okay, what do we do with this information? Need to think about CNAP, right? Uh, cloud native application protection and cloud security posture management, right? Um, those two areas obviously are going to catch a lot of this. Um, and so you need to be thinking about, because if you think about broken access controls, um, one interesting thing from the data is like there's still a ton of open storage buckets, bad ACLs on storage buckets in the cloud. And so that's exposing data. And then you say cryptographic design, or cryptographic failures. That's bad, right? Well, that's another area where we're putting stuff in keys in stored inside of code, stuff like that. Like that's still continuing to happen, and so we're leaving the front door open accidentally a lot of times. And so to me, I think one of the key takeaways here is: do we have a good strategy to catch misconfiguration and vulnerabilities on the right hand side, right once things are out in production, and then also how are we bringing secure design and maturing our design practice, and then assessing before it goes out as well. So there's kind of like the left-hand side, right? Shift left security, still important, still keep focusing there. But thinking about, how do we use better tooling, better practice to analyze and assess on the left-hand side. So before it goes out into production, um, we're catching this stuff. And then obviously things change. So once it goes out into production, you can't just be like, cool, it was secure when we shipped it, therefore it stayed secure. No, stuff changes, configurations change, vulnerabilities are discovered that, weren't there before. And so, you also need that right-hand side, which is what's running in my environment, what's changed, what's new, are there new vulnerabilities, et cetera. Did somebody go in and change permissions on a storage bucket because they were troubleshooting something and opened it up to the world and left it that way, all those kinds of things that happen in a production environment. So to me, if you're looking at those top 3, top 5 things, we need to be thinking about that, right? How are we handling the left-hand side, continuing to shift left in our security, but then not forgetting that we still have to monitor the right-hand side, and look for changes, look for misses, look for updates to vulnerabilities, that kind of stuff, right? So if I took something away from this is like, what do I need to go do? Those are the things I would be thinking about. I need to go assess, how am I doing on the left-hand side? Am I shifting left? Am I continuing to shift left? And then how am I doing on the right-hand side? You know, uh, seeing what's out there, what actually is running in production, and where I have vulnerabilities that need to be addressed.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it goes back to that kind of, hand in hand, right? Marriage between software and infrastructure and how
Yeah,
all these things kind of go together and work together. We're looking at a list of weaknesses in software, but why are they not vulnerabilities necessarily? Like the
yeah,
reason they're just weaknesses, or hopefully they stay as just weaknesses, we can prevent some of that with good
yeah,
infrastructure practices and security on the the runtime side of things as well, right? These all work together hand in hand, and yeah, absolutely, we can
yeah,
one can help out the other. And so that's kind of my takeaway as we're talking about all this as well, is like it's not about just one team or one department. Like good application security isn't going to solve everything.
yeah,
Your weaknesses can become vulnerabilities and you may never know about them if you
yeah,
you know don't have good infrastructure security, and you don't
yeah.
work together between different teams in the organization that are responsible for security. And of course, who's responsible for security?
Everybody.
Everyone. Exactly.
That's it. Go
So
do your quarterly test now. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Mm. Yeah, good stuff. Well, John, thanks for breaking that down for us, and super helpful. Again, for anyone listening, if you couldn't see the screen, hopefully follow along with those top 10. You can go look up those charts. We'll link to it in the show notes as well. So if you want to go take a look at the movement or just kind of read through any of that stuff, it's there for you to take a look at. But again, practice. I feel like every episode turns into a broken record of what's your security practice. Are you doing the basic things, those kinds of things. So let's work on this together. Those are those kinds of things that like we can get better at this. There is a lot of movement. There's a lot going on. AI, yeah, everyone's tired of talking about AI, but it is going to help us here. And so how do we adopt that and into our practice so that we do get better? Are there tools? Do we need to shift tools? I mean, there's a bunch of stuff going on in the industry here. 2026 can be an interesting year. Lots more to come there. But yeah, just good practice matters. Um, Continue to assess it, continue to look at how you're doing. One thing that strikes me too is a lot of tools will tell you kind of what's going on or what your configuration looks like. It's still important to do manual assessment, and just spend that time thinking about it. It's actually all right. I'm going to start this whole rabbit hole. So we'll do another episode on
Next
why
time.
manual assessment matters in security. Right. I think that we'll put that in the queue. We'll get that out there because it does feel like um, you can look at some of what's going on in the industry and think, oh, I just run some tools and I won't have to do an assessment anymore. Um, and this highlights, I think, no, that's not true. There's some reasons why that's not true as you look at this data. So anyway, more to talk about there than I want to get into this far into an episode. So, John,
Yep.
thanks, brother, and yeah, welcome to Security Brothers. Like, subscribe, and check us out on your favorite podcast player: Spotify, Apple, YouTube. We're there. And if you want to see something else or want to hear more from the Security Brothers, hit us up and let us know.
Absolutely. Thanks, brother.
See ya.